T. Esophagus. Applied surgical anatomy and physiology. The esophagus is a muscular tube connecting the pharynx to the stomach. It starts at the level of the cricoid cartilage, C6 vertebra, and ends at the esophagogastric junction, OGJ, opposite T11 thoracic vertebra. In the neck, it descends behind the trachea and anteriorly to the vertebral column following its curvature into the thorax. At the lower part of the thoracic cavity, it transverses the diaphragmatic hiatus, clasped by the crura of the diaphragm and into the stomach. There are slight curvatures of the esophagus. In the neck, it leans slightly more towards the left side, while in the mid-chest it curves slightly towards the right, and in the lower part of the thorax edges to the left again. Thus, in the neck, exposure of the cervical esophagus is generally easier from the left side. The recurrent laryngeal nerves lie in the tracheo-esophageal grooves. On the right side, the recurrent laryngeal nerve at the lower neck is often at a small distance from the tracheo-esophageal groove, while on the left side the nerve is opposed closely to the esophagus and trachea. This is an important anatomical detail when exposing the esophagus and when cervical lymphadenectomy is performed. In perforation from Burroughs syndrome, the perforation tends to affect the lower esophagus on the left side, as this part of the esophagus is less well supported anatomically. There are multiple relative constrictions along the esophagus. First is the upper esophageal sphincter, UOS, second is where the arch of the aorta, left main bronchus crosses the esophagus, and third is the lower esophageal sphincter, LOS. Foreign bodies such as food boluses tend to lodge at these sites. The UOS is a structural sphincter formed by a band of striated muscles of the inferior pharyngeal constrictor and cricopharyngeus. The LOS is much less well defined. It is a complex interplay of the intrinsic muscle tone of the esophageal wall, as well as the diaphragmatic crura. It is also variably exposed to the negative intrathoracic and positive intra-abdominal pressure. Thus, on esophageal manometry, it is identified as a high-pressure zone. The diaphragmatic contribution is more obvious in the presence of a hiatus hernia, where two components of the high-pressure zone can be identified. Disorders of the coordination in UOS and pharyngeal function can result in dysphagia or aspiration symptoms. A common example is in elderly patients following a cerebrovascular accident or in those with neurological diseases. Dysfunction of the UOS is also related to the pathogenesis of the pharyngeal pouch, upper esophageal diverticulum, Zenker's. Weakness of the LOS or inappropriate relaxation can result in esophagogastric reflux disease, GORD, or tightness. Incomplete relaxation can lead to dysphagia, such as in achalasia. For clinical purposes, the esophagus is divided into the cervical, the thoracic and the abdominal esophagus, figure 66.1. These divisions are relevant for cancer staging purposes. The cardia is the portion of the stomach that lies immediately below the OGJ, but there is no clear definition of its extent. Tumors around this region are often referred to as cancer of the cardia. However, it may be better to refer to cancer at the esophagogastric junction. Anatomically, the OGJ is defined as the point where the tubular esophagus becomes the saccular stomach. Histologically, it is the junction between the squamous mucosa and the columnar mucosa, but these levels will be different in Barrett's esophagus. The physiological loss does not correspond to the anatomical OGJ. The loss is a high-pressure zone defined physiologically but not anatomically. In practice, the most relevant definitions relate to findings on endoscopy. Endoscopically, the OGJ is defined as the top of the gastric folds. The esophagus is tubular and does not have folds while the stomach has rugae. In Japan, it is also commonly recognized as the distal end of the esophagus where palisading vessels are found. Anatomy of the esophagus, divisions of the esophagus and measurements endoscopically from the incisors. The three relatively narrow parts of the esophagus are at the level of the cricopharyngeus muscle, upper esophageal sphincter, where the left main bronchus and aorta cross the esophagus and the esophagogastric junction, lower esophageal sphincter. Which definition used is not so important, rather, it requires experience from the endoscopist to define this point accurately. In a real-life situation, the junction is somewhat dynamic with the patient's breathing excursions. An excessive amount of air insufflation may fatten the gastric folds, making it difficult to deepen their top. The presence of a hiatus hernia adds to the difficulty. The location of the junction is important in deafening hiatus hernia. Assessing the presence of Barrett's esophagus, deafening cancers around the OGJN tumor staging. Histologically, the esophageal wall has layers: mucosa, 15 cm, cricopharyngeal constriction, 25 cm, aortic and bronchial constriction, diaphragmatic and sphincter constriction, 40 cm. Submucosa, muscularis propria and adventitia. The mucosa consists of a non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium, the lamina propria and the muscularis mucosae. The esophageal wall lacks a serosa. It is the muscularis mucosae and submucosa that give it strength for suture holding. The muscularis propria has an inner circular muscle and external longitudinal muscle layer, figure 66.3. The muscle of the upper third of the esophagus is made up of striated muscle, the middle third with a mixture of striated and smooth muscle and the lower third with smooth muscle. Connective tissue disease, such as scleroderma, mainly affects smooth muscle, hence the lower esophagus. The blood supply of the upper esophagus is derived from the superior and inferior thyroid arteries. The middle esophagus receives its supply from direct branches of the aorta and bronchial and intercostal vessels. The distal esophagus has the arterial supply from the left gastric, left inferior phrenic and splenic vessels. The blood supply is usually excellent, and a long length of the esophagus can be mobilized without compromising perfusion. An anastomotic leak from esophageal anastomosis after esophagectomy is rarely attributed to poor blood supply of the esophagus, rather, it is the conduit that lacks perfusion. Venous return to the systemic circulation forms a network of vessels within the esophageal wall. They drain to the inferior thyroid, azygos, hemiazygos and gastric veins. The communications of esophageal veins and left gastric veins form part of the portal systemic anastomosis. Cirrhosis leads to their dilatation, varices. Histological layers of the esophagus. Stratified squamous epithelium. Lamina propria. Muscularis mucosae submucosa. Muscularis propria, inner circular muscle layer. Muscularis propria, outer longitudinal muscle layer. Adventitia. The lymphatic drainage of the esophagus is important, especially for cancer spread. There is a rich plexus of lymphatics in the submucosa, and direct drainage to the thoracic duct is also demonstrated. Submucosal spread of cancer along the esophagus proximally and distally is common, and a longer resection margin reduces the chance of local recurrence. In the neck, the cervical esophagus drains to the deep cervical and paratracheal nodes. In the thoracic esophagus, lymphatic spread from a tumor can travel widely. Potentially, it can spread to the neck, mediastinum and the nodes around the celiac axis. Although upper third tumors tend to spread upwards and lower esophageal cancer distally, this can be unpredictable and skip lesions can occur. Of particular importance is lymph node spread along the bilateral recurrent laryngeal nerves. This should be treated as a continuum of lymph node chains along both nerves, and thus they traverse from the chest into the neck. This widespread lymph node spread is the rationale behind the concept of three-fold lymphadenectomy, whereby lymph nodes in the cervical region, mediastinum and around the celiac axis are treated as regional nodes and dissection is recommended in curative surgery. The data mostly come from studies on squamous cell cancers in Japan. The lack of sufficient data for adenocarcinomas, mostly in the lower esophagus, makes the benefit of such extended lymphadenectomy less certain. The thoracic duct is the largest lymphatic vessel in the body. It is formed from the abdominal confluence of the left and right lumbar lymph trunks, as well as the left and right intestinal lymph trunks between T12 and L2. The confluence of lymph trunks is saccular and is referred to as cisterna chyli. Through the diaphragmatic hiatus, the thoracic duct is formed as it ascends along the aorta, next to the azygos vein and esophagus. It then crosses to the left side at T4-T6, going upwards behind the aortic arch and left subclavian artery. In the left neck, it drains into the junction between the left jugular vein and left subclavian vein. Around 75% of the lymph from the entire body, aside from the right upper limb, right breast, right lung and right side of the head and neck, passes through the thoracic duct. The cells of the immune system circulate through the lymphatic system. Also, large molecular products of digestion, such as fats, FRST, need to be absorbed into the lymphatic system, and then reach the systemic circulation through the venous system. During esophagectomy, the thoracic duct and its tributary figure 66.3 histological layers of the esophagus, courtesy of Y's may be damaged, postoperatively presenting as chylothorax. The thoracic duct may also be injured during cervical lymphadenectomy, leading to a chylous leak from the neck wound after surgery. Prolonged chylous drainage cannot be tolerated because there is loss not only of fluid and electrolytes but also important proteins as well as lymphocytes, which cannot be replaced. The path of drainage of lymph explains the offending of Virchow's node, Troisius sign, when a metastatic node is found in the left supraclavicular fossa, both from intra-abdominal malignancies as well as from esophageal cancer. Investigations of esophageal diseases. Radiography. As a posterior mediastinal structure, the esophagus is normally obscured on plain radiographs by other structures such as the spine, major vessels, airway and heart. However, the simple imaging test often gives clues of major pathologies, such as a dilated esophagus with a fluid level in advanced achalasia, figure 66.4, or pneumomediastinum and pleural effusion in esophageal perforation, figure 66.5. Radio-opaque foreign bodies can also be seen. A barium contrast swallow can demonstrate narrowing, anatomical distortion or abnormal esophageal motility. It is however inaccurate in the diagnosis of GORD and should not be used for this purpose. Computed tomography, CT, scanning is important in the staging of a malignant neoplasm, delineating the anatomical relationship with other mediastinal structures, or detecting surgical site infection and extraluminal gas densities, figure 66.6. When used in conjunction with oral contrast, CT is sensitive in identifying perforation and leakage. Endoscopy is an essential tool with both diagnostic and therapeutic roles. A standard diagnostic upper endoscopy includes the examination of the pharynx, hypopharynx, laryngeal inlet, esophagus, stomach and part of the duodenum. The risk of the procedure, depending on complexity, is generally low. Extra care should be taken when performing endoscopy for patients with achalasia or obstruction, as the esophagus can be fluid-filled and regurgitation may lead to aspiration. For patients with suspected esophageal perforation or when the procedure is expected to be prolonged, carbon dioxide should be used for insufflation since it is absorbed more quickly than air. Rigid esophagoscopy is rarely used nowadays except for unusual circumstances, such as retrieving large or sharp foreign objects. Flexible endoscopy with the use of an overtube is an alternative. In patients with significant trismus or obstruction, an ultra-thin endoscope could be used, via either the oral or nasal route, to facilitate the diagnostic or therapeutic procedure. Increasingly, ultra-thin endoscopy can be used in an outpatient clinic setting. Image-enhanced endoscopy improves the diagnostic yield and sensitivity of assessment. It should be performed with a high-definition upper gastrointestinal endoscope, equipped with digital image enhancement such as narrow-band imaging, NBI, and magnification. It can be further supplemented by chromoendoscopy, using Lugol's iodine, 0.5-1%, to look for any suspicious unstained areas and pink color sign in squamous neoplasia. Similarly, acetic acid, 1-3%, is used to look for any loss of aceto-whitening of the mucosal surface of Barrett's mucosa in neoplasia, figure 66.7. Endocytoscopy is a novel ultra-high magnification endoscopic technique enabling high-quality in vivo assessment of lesions with continuous zoom magnification up to 500 times. However, standardized staining methods and endocytoscopic classification are still lacking. With the aid of machine learning and deep learning by artificial intelligence, it is foreseeable that this technique of pattern recognition will greatly improve the sensitivity and specificity of early neoplasia detection and diagnosis. Endosonography endoscopic ultrasonography, EUS, relies on a high-frequency 5 to 30 MHz transducer to provide highly detailed images of the layers of the esophageal wall and mediastinal structures close to the esophagus. There are two types of EUS, radial echoendoscope, which has a rotating transducer that creates a circular image with the endoscope in the center, and linear echoendoscope, which produces a sectoral image in the line of the endoscope. Mini ultrasound probes that are around 2.0-2.9 mm in diameter can be inserted through the biopsy channel of an ordinary endoscope to give a simple radial diagnostic assessment within a narrowed lumen. This is useful for obstructive tumor. The different layers of the esophageal wall are characterized by its alternating echogenicity, figure 66.8. Different structures can be identified adjacent to the esophagus and used as landmarks, such as the aorta, the azygos vein and the spine. EUS can also provide a Doppler signal to differentiate index lesions from genuine vascular structures or abnormality before attempting biopsy. Biopsy of submucosal esophageal lesions or mediastinal masses such as lymph nodes can be performed with linear echoendoscopes for histological diagnosis and staging. Esophageal manometry is used to diagnose esophageal motility disorders and to assess the esophageal body and loss function before surgery, such as antiofix operations. Conventional manometry was developed in the 1950s with water-perfused catheters. Recordings were made by passing a multilumen catheter, usually with only 8 channels, down the esophagus and into the stomach. The catheter is withdrawn progressively up the esophagus and recordings are taken at intervals of 0.5-1.0 cm to measure the length and pressure of the loss and assess motility in the body of the esophagus during swallowing water boluses. With the introduction of the color contour plot by Ray Klaus in 1995, conventional manometry is gradually being replaced by high-resolution manometry, HRM, with solid-state pressure catheters. A typical HRM catheter has 36 circumferential sensors along its length, each spaced 1 cm apart. HRM defines important anatomical landmarks and abnormality of the uos, loss and hiatus hernia. It also measures the contractility of the esophageal body, figure 66.9. Various parameters are measured in response to a standardized protocol of drinking a small volume of water. Other optional evaluations include solid test swallows and/or pharmacological provocation tests. Esophageal peristalsis that is triggered by the swallow center in the brain is called primary peristalsis. A hierarchical analysis is established under the Chicago classification to diagnose various esophageal motility disorders. Endoluminal functional lumen imaging planimetry. Endoluminal functional lumen imaging planimetry, FLIP is a volume-controlled distension balloon device. It utilizes impedance planimetry to measure the cross-sectional areas along the length of the balloon, and one pressure sensor measures the intra-balloon pressure. When placed inside the esophagus, spanning across the loss, it gives a real-time assessment of loss distensibility, cross-sectional area divided by intra-bag pressure, and esophageal contractility in response to balloon distension. The device is mostly still investigational but is expected to gain wider clinical use. It can be used to guide the intraoperative endpoint for completeness of myotomy for achalasia, change in diameter and distensibility of the loss, or in screening esophageal function to assess the need for formal HRM, figure 66.10. Ambulatory refix in combined pH impedance monitoring. Ambulatory refix monitoring is considered one of the most important confirmatory tests for GORD. There are two types of monitoring devices: catheter-based and wireless capsule, figure 66.11. Both measure the pH value at 5 to 6 cm above the upper border of the loss, as defined by manometry. For the catheter-based device, data are captured conventionally for 24 hours. The wireless capsule device is anchored onto the mucosa of the esophagus by a pin and can transmit pH data for up to 96 hours. Various parameters are measured, such as the number of refix episodes, when pH drops below 4, and esophageal acid exposure time, the percentage of time exposed to pH less than 4, figure 66.12. An esophageal exposure time of more than 4% can be considered abnormal, and one more than 6% is considered diagnostic. A composite score, Johnson-D Meester, consists of 6 parameters that can be calculated. The patient needs to record their symptoms. Throughout the study period, so that symptom correlation with pH data can be calculated. The catheter-based pH monitoring device also incorporates measurement of impedance. Impedance is inversely proportional to the electrical conductivity of the luminal contents in the cross-sectional area. Liquid refixate has high conductivity and therefore low impedance. On the other hand, air has low conductivity and high impedance. With the change in the temporal spatial patterns in different impedance sensors spreading across different levels of the monitoring catheter, any bolus transit can be assessed in its direction, antegrade or retrograde, as well as by its nature, air or liquid. Thus, acid reflux, aerophagia, belching and liquid passage can be distinguished, figure 66.13. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. Etiology. GORD is defined by the Montreal definition as a condition that develops when the reflux of stomach contents causes troublesome symptoms and/or complications. The etiology of GORD can be explained by the interaction between the reflux barrier and the pressure difference between the thoracic and abdominal cavity. The reflux barrier consists of the crural diaphragm and the loss. Physiological relaxation of the loss in response to stretching of the gastric fundus, particularly after a meal to allow venting of swallowed air, is termed transient. Loss relaxations, TLOSRs. An increased number of TLOSRs in a more compliant loss would increase refix. Delay in acid refixate clearance from the esophagus, as a result of defective esophageal motility, also contributes to esophageal exposure. Hiatus hernia is associated with GORD. It is formed when the weakened phrenoesophageal ligament and widened crural opening allow the proximal stomach to herniate through the diaphragmatic hiatus. Aging, connective tissue disease and elevated intra-abdominal pressure, e.g. central obesity, pregnancy, tight garments, chronic straining, will further aggravate the hernia. An acid pocket is an area of unbuffered gastric acid that accumulates in the proximal stomach after Mealsin serves as a reservoir for acid reflux. Together with a hiatus hernia, it can exacerbate the severity and symptoms of GORD. The overall global incidence of GORD is increasing in has a predominant regional distribution in the Americas and Europe. Up to 33% of the population is affected, compared with less than 10% in Asia. The increase in GORD incidence is attributed to the global increase in obesity and declining rates of Helicobacter pylori infection. This increasing prevalence of GORD coincides with the increased mortality rates from esophageal adenocarcinoma. Central obesity, independent of body mass index, is a risk factor for developing Barrett's esophagus and adenocarcinoma, while H. pylori may have a preventive role. The postulated mechanism is that decreased acid production as a result of H. pylori-related corpus gastritis or gastric atrophy would lead to decreased esophageal acid exposure. Clinical features. Symptoms of GORD can be classified into esophageal or extraesophageal. Typical esophageal complaints include heartburn, which is defined as a burning sensation behind the sternum, and regurgitation, which is the perception of the flow of refixed gastric content into the mouth or hypopharynx. Patients may also complain of epigastric pain, which can be a manifestation of erosive esophagitis. Symptoms cannot accurately predict the severity of the mucosal injury. Dysphagia can be related to large hiatus hernia, stricture or even esophageal carcinoma. Bleeding from erosive esophagitis, Cameron ulcers, gastric ulcers at the level of the diaphragmatic constriction within large hiatus hernias, or tumors can present as coffee ground vomiting or frank hematemesis. Extraesophageal symptoms may include chronic cough, laryngitis, asthma and dental erosions, especially on the lingual and palatal tooth surfaces. The causative relationship of extraesophageal manifestations can sometimes be vague. These problems are usually multifactorial but can be aggravated by GORD. Other conditions with proposed association with GORD include sinusitis, pulmonary fibrosis, pharyngitis and recurrent otitis media. Symptoms are often provoked by food, particularly after a full meal with increased intragastric pressure or food that delays gastric emptying, e.g. oily, spicy food. The refixate can cause an unpleasant taste, often described as acidic or bitter. Intensive exercise may sometimes induce GORD in healthy subjects owing to an increase in intra-abdominal pressure. Some patients may complain of nocturnal symptoms especially when lying supine, probably related to the gravitational effect. This may significantly affect patients' sleep. Mild symptoms occurring 2 or more days a week or moderate, severe symptoms affecting more than 1 day a week are considered troublesome. Diagnosis. In most cases, the diagnosis is assumed rather than proven, and treatment is empirical. Proton pump inhibitors, PPIs, are very effective drugs in managing erosive esophagitis and acid-related symptoms. They are often used empirically as a diagnostic trial. However, there is a significant placebo effect. A positive treatment response with 2 weeks of a PPI can be observed in 69% of GORD patients and 51% of those without GORD, as defined by pH monitoring in endoscopic esophagitis. This may create a problem of overdiagnosis of GORD and overuse of PPIs. Endoscopic examination provides anatomical assessment, screening for complications of GORD and potential alternative diagnoses such as eosinophilic esophagitis, EOO, esophageal motility disorder or esophageal cancer, figure 66.14. In practice, many patients will have received PPIs before referral. To endoscopy and such information must be available before the procedure because PPIs can heal esophagitis quickly, figure 66.15. It is worth remembering that the correlation between symptoms and endoscopic appearances is poor. In patients with atypical or persistent symptoms despite PPI therapy, esophageal manometry and ambulatory pH recording, with or without impedance measurement, are justified to establish the diagnosis and guide management. In patients considered for surgery, it is also prudent to have objective proof of significant refix before embarking on a potentially irreversible invasive procedure. HRM is useful in I. detecting major esophageal motility disorder, e.g. achalasia, which can sometimes mimic GORD, E. defining the location of the loss for accurate pH monitoring placement, E. assessing the function and morphology of the loss, including the size of a hiatus hernia, and IV. assessing esophageal body motility to tailor intervention, especially the various anti-affix procedures. PPIs are usually stopped for 2 weeks before esophageal pH recording. For patients with a strong pretest probability of GORD but refractory to PPI treatment, and, on PPI, assessment can be performed to test for breakthrough acid exposure despite PPI therapy. Wireless pH monitoring increases the duration of recording to 96 hours and could potentially increase the test sensitivity and diagnostic yield. A barium contrast study gives an objective and dynamic assessment of the esophagogastric anatomy. This may be important in the context of surgery for rolling or mixed hiatus hernias. It is also useful in assessing surgical complications after anti-affix surgery, such as a disrupted wrap, slipped fundoplication or wrap herniation. However, it is not mandatory for ordinary and uncomplicated GORD patients. Management of uncomplicated GORD. Lifestyle modification patients are recommended to have a healthy diet, avoid overeating and avoid dietary items, e.g. carbonated drinks, alcohol, tea or coffee, or activities that in the patient's experience would provoke the symptoms. Patients with nocturnal symptoms should have early dinner and avoid recumbence after meals. Elevation of the head of the bed may also help. Smoking cessation reduces severe reflux symptoms in normal weight individuals on medical treatment. Weight management is recommended for overweight patients. Medical management. Most patients with GORD self-medicate with over-the-counter medicines such as simple antacids, antacid alginate. Preparations and H2 receptor antagonists. Consultation is more likely when symptoms are severe, prolonged and unresponsive to simple measures and treatments. Pharmacological treatments mainly target acid reduction or neutralization. With the development of PPIs in the 1980s, they have quickly become the FRST line. Treatment for symptomatic GORD. Figure 66.15 Grading of esophagitis according. Given an adequate dose for 8 weeks, most patients have a rapid improvement in symptoms within a few days, and more than 90% can expect full mucosal healing of esophagitis, if present, at the end of this time. A policy of step-down medical treatment is advocated after the initial 8 weeks of treatment to a dose that keeps the patient free of symptoms, and this might even mean the cessation of PPI. Gastroesophageal reflux disease. Filled circle GORD is common, but symptomatology may be confused with other disorders, such as achalasia. Both may present with regurgitation. C.D. Filled circle sliding hiatus hernia predisposes to GORD. Filled circle heartburn and regurgitation are typical GORD symptoms. Filled circle. Beware of extraesophageal manifestations of GORD. Filled circle. A PPI is the most effective medical treatment, but regurgitation is not well controlled by PPIs. Most patients do not make sustained major lifestyle changes, and because PPIs are so effective, many remain on long-term treatment. Those patients who have an inadequate treatment response may benefit from changing to another PPI, an increased dosage of the same PPI, a twice-a-day regimen, or the addition of an H2 receptor antagonist. PPI is also important in patients with reflux-induced strictures, resulting in significant prolongation of the intervals between endoscopic dilatations. There have been numerous reports on the association between chronic PPI use and a myriad of side effects. Most could not demonstrate a causal relationship except some enteric infections and fundus gland polyps. However, patients are still advised to use the lowest effective dose for symptom control. Prokinetic agents, e.g. metoclopramide and domperidone, are not particularly useful and have potential safety issues. Other TLOSR inhibitors were also disappointing. Antacid alginate preparations target the acid pockets and form a polysaccharide barrier at the proximal stomach. A more recent development are the potassium competitive acid blockers (PCABs). Compared with PPIs, PCABs have a more rapid, competitive, reversible inhibition of proton pumps. However, they are available in only limited regions. With pH monitoring, it is possible to identify patients with different phenotypes, especially distinguishing those having pathological versus physiological reflex, and positive versus negative symptom correlations. For patients with discordant reflex activity and symptom association, as in esophageal hypersensitivity or functional disorder, antiaffix therapy is likely to fail. Other treatment options include perception modulators, e.g. tricyclic antidepressants and selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, or alternative therapies, e.g. hypnosis and behavioral therapy. Surgical management. While most patient symptoms are satisfactorily controlled with PPIs and other medications, surgery remains an important option. The indications for surgery include I. Incomplete symptom control with medical management, E. Intolerance of, or unwillingness to comply with, long-term medical therapy, E. Regurgitation despite medication, less well amenable to PPI, IV, presence of a large hiatus hernia, V. Complications arising from GORD, and V. Extraesophageal symptoms. The predictors of good surgical outcome include typical GORD symptoms, PPI responders, presence of hiatus hernia and presence of GORD complications, e.g. reflex esophagitis, grade B or above, and non-dysplastic Barrett's esophagus. Factors leading to poor surgical outcomes are normal preoperative pH monitoring when performed off PPI, functional heartburn, EOO, connective tissue diseases and extreme obesity. Careful preoperative counseling is essential. Risks of antiaffix surgery include a small mortality rate, 0.1–0.5%, failed operation, 5 to 10%, and side effects such as dysphagia, gas bloat or abdominal discomfort, 10%. When performed well in appropriately selected patients, 80 to 90% of patients should be satisfied with the result of the operation. Which operation? Antiaffix operations have three essential components. A. Restoration of an intra-abdominal segment of the esophagus, E. Crural repair, and E. Some form of reinforcement of the loss by the upper stomach, fundoplication, or by a prosthesis placed around the intra-abdominal esophagus. The major types of antiaffix operations were all developed in the 1950s. For many years, the relative merits of thoracic and abdominal approaches were hotly debated. With the introduction of laparoscopy, laparoscopic fundoplication with hiatal reconstruction is the standard approach. The mechanism of fundoplication is to create a FOPI valve around the OGJ and to restore the angle of His. It has the effect of increasing lost basal pressure, lessening TLOSR and reducing the capacity of the gastric fundus, thereby enhancing gastric emptying. The different types of fundoplication have been compared extensively in clinical trials, but the superiority of one over the others could not be shown. Complete fundoplication, Nissen, is associated with a higher incidence of short-term dysphagia but is most durable in reflex control. Partial fundoplication, whether performed posteriorly, Toupet, or anteriorly, Doe, Watson, has fewer short-term side effects, although this is at the expense of a slightly higher long-term failure rate, figure 66.16. The most common side effect of fundoplication is short surgical management. While most patients' symptoms are satisfactorily controlled with PPIs and other medications, surgery remains an important option. The indications for surgery include I. Incomplete symptom control with The most common side effect of fundoplication is short surgical management, while more term dysphagia, related presumably to tissue edema and inflammation. It usually resolves within 3 months of surgery. Some patients may experience gas bloat syndrome, especially after complete fundoplication. Typically, the patient would complain of gaseous distension of the abdomen and failure to belch or vomit, together with an increase in flatulence. In the last decade, a magnetic prosthesis has become available to reinforce the loss after hiatal reconstruction, figure 66.17. This has a similar efficacy to fundoplication in the mid to long term and has fewer gas bloat side effects. The magnetic ring prosthesis consists of titanium-coated magnetic beads, connected by titanium wire. The physics of the magnets allows a lower attraction force when the beads are separated. This property of relaxation is a more physiological sphincter to allow food passage and is less likely to create esophageal outflow obstruction. This device is contraindicated in patients with major motility disorders, ineffective esophageal motility or connective tissue disease. Laparoscopic fundoplication, filled circle HRM and pH monitoring are recommended investigations before consideration of surgical treatment. Filled circle pH monitoring confirms GORD and HRM assesses esophageal body function and loss characteristics. Filled circle surgery should be tailored to esophageal motility. Magnetic sphincter augmentation. Intraoperative photograph following hiatus hernia repair. The magnetic sphincter is implanted around the lower esophagus, in between the posterior vagus nerve, white arrows, and the esophageal wall. Complications of antibiotic surgery in revisional surgery. Structurally, a wrap can be too tight or too loose. It can also be partially or completely disrupted, herniated or slipped. Structural laxity can give rise to recurrent or persistent GORD. Too long or too tight a fundoplication can give rise to dysphagia and gas bloat syndrome. Endoscopy, contrast radiography and functional testing can assess the anatomy responsible and guide further management. Management strategies include a PPI for recurrent acid reflux, endoscopic dilatation of stenosis, and surgical revision as a last resort. A tight complete fundoplication can be remedied by conversion to a partial fundoplication. For patients with anatomical failure and refractory symptoms, revisional surgery carries a lower chance of success. In some patients, local revision is technically impossible, as often there will be adhesion formation and altered anatomy. Transient dysphagia is common after both fundoplication and magnetic sphincter augmentation. For the latter, there may be more prolonged dysphagia requiring dilatation or, rarely, migration and erosion, 0.15%. Removal of the device is required in 2.7% of patients. The majority can be accomplished endoscopically or laparoscopically. Endoscopic treatment. Several endoscopic treatments have been tested that attempt to augment the failing loss. Transoral incisionless fundoplication mimics classic fundoplication by recreating the dynamics of the angle of his using an endoscopic stapling device. Meta-analysis demonstrates improvement in clinical response compared with PPIs. However, esophageal acid exposure time and reflux episodes are not significantly improved and PPI usage increases with time. Radiofrequency ablation, RFA, is another strategy to remodel the loss by reducing compliance. Again, it partially improves quality of life but does not normalize pH exposure time, and almost 50% of patients still require PPI at follow-up. Antiaffix mucosectomy makes use of the endoscopic mucosal resection, EMR, technique to remove subcardiac mucosa while preserving a 1 cm gap at the lesser and greater curves. The contraction and scarring. Presumably improve the reflux barrier. Small case series have shown improvement in both quality of life and acid reflux. A significant proportion of patients require balloon dilatation for stenosis. These procedures have been applied to patients with only small hiatus hernias or none at all, so only a small proportion of patients are suitable. Recently, argon plasma coagulation has been used to accomplish the same subcardiac mucosal injury instead of EMR. Technically, this is much less demanding than EMR. Complex gastroesophageal reflux disease. Figure 66.1. Peptic strictures and dilatation reflux-induced strictures are relatively rare in the era of PPIs, as most patients will be treated empirically before long-term complications occur. These strictures generally respond well to dilatation in long-term treatment with a PPI. Antifix surgery is an alternative to long-term PPI treatment, just as in uncomplicated GORD. Most patients do not require anything other than a standard operation. Hiatus hernia and paroesophageal rolling hernia. Hiatus hernia is a condition in which the abdominal contents migrate through the hiatal opening of the diaphragm into the mediastinum. There are 4 types of hiatus hernia. Figure 66.18I. The sliding hernia, type 1, accounting for most hiatus hernias, 85 to 95%, where the OGJ is herniated upwards. E. The true paroesophageal, rolling hernia, type 2, where there is asymmetrical herniation of the stomach next to the esophagus and the OGJ remains in its normal intra-abdominal position. This is relatively uncommon. E. The more common mixed sliding and paroesophageal hernia, type 3, and IV, when abdominal viscera other than the stomach migrate into the hernia sac, it is classified as type 4. Hiatus hernia is closely related to advanced age and obesity. A sliding hiatus hernia predisposes to GORD and is usually diagnosed in the presence of reflux symptoms. For asymptomatic patients, it can be an incidental offending on plain chest radiographs or CT as an intrathoracic gas bubble or fluid level. Figure 66.19. A paroesophageal hernia, especially when large, presents more with obstructive symptoms. The term, giant paroesophageal hernia, is present when more than half of the stomach has herniated into the thoracic cavity. Figure 66.20. This may present as a surgical emergency if gastric volvulus occurs. It is more common for the stomach to rotate along its longitudinal axis, termed organoxial volvulus. When the stomach rotates around the transverse axis, it is called mesentericoaxial volvulus. Gastric volvulus can produce symptoms such as dysphagia and chest pain. In severe cases, it can cause obstruction, strangulation, ischemia, perforation and compression on the lungs, leading to impaired lung function. Emergency presentation and operation with any of these complications carries a high morbidity rate on account of a combination of late diagnosis, advanced patient age, comorbidities and the complexity of surgery involved. Therefore, all symptomatic paroesophageal hiatus hernias should be repaired. The decision to repair an asymptomatic paroesophageal hernia needs to balance risk with the patient's age and comorbidities, as the annual risk of developing acute symptoms requiring emergency surgery is probably less than 2%. Patients who present acutely should FRST be resuscitated, followed by nasogastric tube decompression. Immediate surgery is needed if there is suspicion of ischemia, perforation or unresolved obstruction. The surgical principle is similar to that of sliding hiatus hernia repair but more technically demanding. The steps include reduction of any herniated organ, extensive mediastinal dissection to restore the intra-abdominal length of the esophagus, excision of the hernia. SAC to prevent a recurrence. Repair of the crura in a tension-free manner. some form of affixation of the stomach in the abdomen. Summary box 66.3. Hiatus hernia filled circle type 1 sliding hernia predisposes to gourd filled circle types 2, 3. IV parosophageal hernia present mainly with obstructive symptoms. Filled circle volvulus and strangulation require emergency surgical treatment.